Hello and welcome to Top Story. The mixed response of European leaders to the triumph of President Vladimir Putin in Russia's parliamentary elections has again underlined persisting divisions within the European Union on how to deal with Moscow. In particular, the decision of French President Nicolas Sarkozy to telephone Putin to congratulate him on his victory appears sharply at odds with the position of the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. In an unusually tough statement, Berlin described the elections as neither free, fair or democratic. Russia, it said, was not a democracy, a view seconded by the British government, which demanded an immediate investigation of alleged electoral abuses, and by the new Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. In reference to the Russian election, he said on Tuesday that Europe should not turn a blind eye when democratic standards were being broken. So does the French reaction again show that Russia is able to divide Europe on the key issues at will? Well, joining me now to discuss the question of Europe's relationship with Russia is Yannick Mireur, the chief editor of Politique Américaine, a journal specializing in international politics. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. Well, here we are again, division on the issues that count when Russia is concerned. We've got the Germans saying we must criticize this in the most forthright terms, and the first thing that the French president does is to phone him up and congratulate him. What's going on?
Well, I guess it is not the first time that there are different views on Russian events. It used not to be always the case that the Germans had that reaction. You remember that with Chancellor Schroeder, the relationship with Russia and with Mr. Putin in particular was a little different. Now, as far as Mr. Sarkozy is concerned, one has to remind that his position when he was elected president was a little tougher on Russia and warmer to the United States. And I think his move to telephone the Russian president is not completely at odds with his policy. And I must also say that the Italian Prime Minister, socialist-leaning this one, has also congratulated Mr. Putin for his election. I think all in all we've
but been... sorry to interrupt, it does suggest rather a lack of coordination of policy at the top European level.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That is, all along all these years, since the election of Mr. Putin as Russian president and the end of the Soviet Union, there has been changes and ups and downs in the relationship between Russia and the EU. There is first the point that the EU has indeed not coordinated the way it should have, perhaps, or could have, its policy towards Russia, which is a reflection, in fact, on a lack of thinking and forward-thinking, perhaps, in terms of what the EU should do about Russia and what the strategic relationship should be, although it has been building up over the years. And the second thing is also the fact that it is not as simple. That is to say, we're not just dealing with a bilateral relationship that is, in a way, predictable. I mean, Russia has come through very difficult, particular historical times over the past 15 years and more. And I think we haven't gone through the depth of the change, the sea change that this represents in Russia's psyche.
There's been a lot of talk over the last year about how to deal with Russia at the top European level, particularly on the issue of energy and developing a European energy policy. If they can't get their act together on how to react to a parliamentary election, how are they going to get their act together at top level and unite a position on an issue as complicated as energy?
There has been efforts, and Mr. Prodi, when he was in fact president of the European Commission, has offered a few axes of perhaps cooperation. The question is that, of course, energy is the backbone of the political discussion between the EU and Russia, and it's in fact quite a stabilizing, perhaps, aspects of these relations when they are stabilized. Indeed, in fact, commercially they are. The question is also that perhaps sometimes we talk about over-dependence, and there is a little panic of energy dependence on Russia. In fact, one has to observe that the reverse is also true. That is to say, the Russians are also depending on the European markets for the sale of their resources. And you know that gas contracts are contracts over a few decades, so there are very long-term relationships, and these relationships have been strong and old indeed with the various players, the French of course, but most particularly the Germans, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, and especially also the Italians for reasons that would be too long to explain here. So these commercial relationships have never been at stake or in question, including during the recent events and the cut of gas supplies by the Russians to their neighbors, Ukraine and Belarus, when in fact they have, according also to the global framework of energy liberalization that the EU Commission is pushing forward, changed the foundations of their commercial and political relationships with the immediate neighbors that are no longer part of the Soviet Union. So all these reinvention that, if you will, mixes political and commercial issues, is something that Russia has to deal with. And the EU has to comprehend the implications of all this.
One of the things that makes President Sarkozy's decision to call President Putin a little surprising in the context is that up until now, he's been stressing the importance of a principled foreign policy. Indeed, when he spoke to the French ambassadors in August this year, he stressed the importance of human rights in dealing with Russia in particular. He singled out Chechnya, for instance, and said that France had to adopt a principled foreign policy. Why do you think he's taken this stance now?
I don't think there is a dramatic change in the policy. It's just the fact that, first of all, you have to deal with the fact. That is to say, Mr. Putin has been re-elected the way it has been. There have been some irregularities with the election. He's the representative of Russia, and once again, Russia has to...
There's no need to phone him up. Angela Merkel didn't call him.
Well, it is perhaps a personal judgment. You never know exactly what things are being, what the leaders say to themselves. And it's exactly the same thing with Iran, for instance, when Russia, in fact, has been rather pushing a coherent line of action with the Europeans on that. And when recently the Iran negotiator or foreign minister, I can't remember, was in Moscow, it was told to him that Iran has to stick with the requirements of the international agency based in Vienna for the atomic watchdog. So the specifics are sometimes a little different than the headlines, and of course then the interpretation of the headlines. I think there is a line that consists in saying we have to deal with Russia the way it is without frustrating the
bottom
power.
Line, sorry.
The bottom line, indeed, is to take into account the constraints and the difficulties of the Russian power, the misperceptions that have misshaped EU-Russia relationships, needless to say, US-Russia relationship as well over the past 15 years. So we have to warm up to it in order perhaps to better attain our objectives. Now,
sorry, go on.
Yeah. Now, in the specifics, that doesn't really conflict with perhaps hard discussions head-to-head between heads of states. I think it is we are overplaying the telephone call.
The bottom line really is that Russia is a major power, major political power, major economic power, and a major geostrategic power, and Europe has no choice but to deal with it.
You may see this is real politics, but there is the EU has been trying to find a way to deal with Russia in an adapted manner, and I think we're not seeing the end of it.
Okay, and that's where we're going to have to stop it, I'm afraid. Thanks very much to our guest today, Yannick Micha. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.